Hi, this is Satu again. In this video, I'll talk about two things that students often worry about, namely first-person pronouns and whether they should use the active or the passive voice in academic writing. Using first-person pronouns like I may seem to clash with the requirement that the style of writing should be objective. Being objective means that you must avoid biased language and generalizations, and that you shouldn't bring in your own personal preconceptions and opinions. This doesn't necessarily mean that you need to avoid using first-person pronouns like I altogether. How acceptable it is to use first-person pronouns like I depends both on the discipline and on the context. In many disciplines, it's perfectly all right to use I most of the time. To find out what the conventions for your own discipline are, you can just read a few articles written by well-known authors in your field and see what they do. It's important to remember, however, that overusing I, especially in combination with verbs like think and feel, may really make the text sound subjective, so that it focuses on your personal feelings and opinions rather than on facts. Avoiding first-person pronouns like I altogether is not a good solution either, as it can make the text sound very vague, in the sense that it's not clear who did what and who carried out experiments, and whose arguments are actually being discussed. It's like no one takes responsibility for what is said in the text. This is not something you want, of course, so it's important to find a balance. Another problem that students often worry about is choosing between the active and passive voice. In active sentences, the subject is the agent or actor. In other words, the entity that does something or causes something to happen. The queen in the sentence, the queen ate the cupcake, or the dog in the sentence, the dog bit the postman. In passive sentences, the subject is the entity that is affected or undergoes the action. The cupcake was eaten, or the postman was bitten by the dog. In most disciplines, the active voice should be preferred when writing essays because it makes the text a lot easier to read and understand. But there are cases where you need to think of what you want to say, because the active and passive present the same information from two different angles. An active sentence like "the Danes built this castle" tells you something about the Danes and what they did. They built this castle. A passive sentence like "this castle was built by the Danes" tells you something about this castle. It was built by the Danes. Whether you choose the active or the passive then boils down to the question of whether you want your sentence to be about the Danes or about the castle. There are also a few cases where the passive voice might be the best alternative. A sentence like "the Lund Cathedral was built in the 12th century" is natural because most people who live in Lund don't have a clue who actually built the cathedral. You can't use the active because you don't know who the agent or actor is. And in a sentence like "in the data collection several mistakes were made," you may want to be vague on purpose because you don't want the reader to see right away that the agent actor is the same as you, the author, and that it was you who made all those mistakes. Using the passive voice is a good way to try and make this less clear without actually being dishonest.